Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, July 22nd. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to.
Moshe, as I mentioned last week, I'm ready for fall, as are many of our listeners. And apparently, so is Starbucks. They are bringing the pumpkin spice latte back on August 26th.
So just 5 weeks away. August 26th, it could be super, super hot. You might want... Do they do pumpkin spice latte, iced pumpkin spice latte, Jill?
I don't see why not.
Well, on August 26th, I better hope so. So it turns out
if you're going to come out in August, yes, it better be cold.
It better be cold in most parts of the country. Last year, actually, it was much earlier in August. So that led people to be like, wait, excuse me? So it looks like they're moving it slightly back, but still only 5 weeks away for those of you who wait every year for that seasonal drink. And a reminder, again, while the PSL will be back on August 26th, fall does not officially start until September 22nd, but not soon enough for many of you, as we noted on the podcast recently, based on U.S. polling numbers and polling numbers on Jill's Instagram page.
Very scientific.
Well, yeah, but in this case, not scientific, but very much in line with where the country is. Fall's the most popular season of the year, everybody.
And by the way, Starbucks also adding a new fall drink called the Pecan Cortado, which they say is a combo of fall flavors with bold espresso, whatever that means.
Listen, I like fall flavors. I like bold espresso, pecans. Let's see what they came up with. We'll look out for that.
You say pecan, I say pecan.
Oh, yeah.
Let's call the whole thing off.
There's probably a whole divide in this country about how to pronounce that particular nut.
All right, let's get to the headlines here. The Trump administration releasing secret documents. And no, they are not about Jeffrey Epstein. It is the FBI records on MLK Jr., why his family did not want them public.
Yeah, we'll tell you what MLK Jr.'s kids are saying about the release.
Texas taking steps to redistrict, why some say it could ensure Republicans keep control of the House, particularly in the upcoming midterm elections.
We'll tell you yet one other reason why Texas is special among the states, and how everything when it comes to redistricting and gerrymandering is being taken to a new level.
Remember back in January, a military helicopter collided with a passenger plane in D.C., killing everyone on board? Well, we'll tell you what happened last week. Disaster averted when a commercial pilot had to make what he called an aggressive maneuver to avoid collision with a B-52 bomber. Overseas, 28 Western nations say that the Gaza war must end now. We'll tell you about the effort to bring about a ceasefire in the region. In business news, first eggs. Now beef prices are going way up. What's behind it? Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, speaking out about why his dad had such a bad debate performance against President Trump last year. And Moshe, we have heard a lot of excuses, but this was a first.
Well, Hunter spent a lot of time with him, and he reveals, at least from his perspective, what drug Biden was taking that could have affected the performance.
And it was not cocaine, as President Trump has alleged in the past.
No, this was not performance-enhancing drugs, as Trump was worried about.
And in very sad news, Malcolm-Jamal Warner, who played Theo on The Cosby Show, dies at the age of 54. We'll take a look back on his life and legacy. And Moshe is on this day in history.
Scaramouche, Scaramouche, will you do the fandango on this day in history, Jill? But it's more like Scaramouche, Scaramouche.
And why, I knew where you were going.
And why that particular band was told that song had no chance.
All right, the Trump administration releasing hundreds of thousands of FBI files on a high-interest case. And again, we are not talking about Jeffrey Epstein. On Monday, the government released more than 200,000 files related to the 1968 MLK assassination. The director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, wrote on social media, after nearly 60 years of questions surrounding the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., we are releasing 230,000 MLK assassination files. They are available online. We'll link to them in our show notes. Gabbard says they include details about the FBI's investigation into the assassination, discussion of potential leads, internal FBI memos about the progress of the case, and information about James Earl Ray's former cellmate who had said that he had talked to Ray about an alleged assassination plot. The release also includes evidence from a Canadian police department and never-before-seen CIA records that outline overseas intelligence on the international hunt for Ray, who was at the time the prime suspect in the assassination. James Earl Ray pleaded guilty to assassinating King. He later renounced that plea and maintained his innocence until his death back in 1998. Members of King's family and others have questioned whether Ray acted alone or if he was even involved. King's widow, Coretta Scott King, had asked for the probe into MLK's death to be reopened. And in 1998, then Attorney General Janet Reno directed the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Justice Department to take a new look. The Justice Department said that it, quote, found nothing to disturb the 1969 judicial determination that James Earl Ray murdered Dr. King. MLK's family filed a wrongful death civil lawsuit in Tennessee in 1999. They say the jury concluded that someone other than Ray was the shooter and that he was set up to take the blame. Fast forward, when President Trump first took office for his second term, he signed an executive order calling for the declassification of records concerning the assassinations of President JFK, Robert F. Kennedy, and MLK Jr. The government unsealed the JFK records in March and some of the RFK files in April. And now it is MLK's turn.
Yeah, but a number of members of his family not on board with this. Now, some of these documents were set to come out in about 2 years. Trump has pushed it up here based on that campaign promise. Jill, I found it notable, sort of on her own Twitter account, Bernice King, who was MLK Jr.'s youngest daughter. She was 5 when her father was assassinated in April of 68, tweeted simply a photo of her father with the caption, "Now do the Epstein files." So a quick recap here on what we know about the assassination and the sort of remaining questions that are out there. James Earl Ray was the assassin who pleaded guilty to shooting and killing MLK Jr., but then later recanted that admission in prison. So James Earl Ray, the official narrative is he acted as a lone gunman, but the King family for years, along with other civil rights leaders, have said that they believe Ray was a scapegoat and he was set up. Now, James Earl Ray says that his lawyer said to avoid the death penalty, you should plead guilty. So he pleaded guilty. But later in prison, he said, actually, I was forced to do that by my lawyers. There was actually a man named Raul who directed my actions in the months before the assassination, and he played a central role here. I was just following Raul's orders. Now, they have never discovered who Raul is, if there's a real identity there, who that would have been, if there was a government official, who that was. But that's been one of the big questions here for a while. One of the things they also note, the King family notes, Jill, is that the government never had to test its case in trial, right? Because he pleaded guilty. So we don't actually know everything that the government knew or how much of a case they really had against him. The rifle tied to James Earl Ray may, according to some studies, not have officially matched the bullet that killed King. There are witness reports from the scene that pointed to other directions of where they think the bullet came from. There's arguments about how evidence was mishandled over time. We should note that there was a House Select Committee on Assassinations in the 1970s. This went through the evidence of the various Kennedy assassinations as well as the King assassinations. And that committee did conclude that Ray was the shooter, but likely had co-conspirators. They just didn't know much details about them. They said they're probably co-conspirators. We just don't know who they were or who they represented. So for a while, the King family called for reopening the investigation. They visited Ray in prison. And the theory behind all of this, Jill, is that there was increasing concern in the U.S. government, and we know this from papers that have already been released, that Martin Luther King was expanding his power over time and his following. That it wasn't just about civil rights. By the late 60s, he'd gone to economic justice. He had opposed the Vietnam War early. He was making plans for what he called the Poor People's Campaign. So he was really looking at having marches of both black and white people in poverty, lower income levels, opposed to the war. And there were always concerns within the U.S. government and the FBI about Martin Luther King's power. There are audio tapes of LBJ when he was president talking to J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, being like, what are we going to do about this King guy? And so for many, many years, the FBI was surveilling him. They were recording him in every hotel room he was in. And at times, Jill, they were trying to take things that he was doing, allegedly doing, and trying to blackmail him with them. That includes the fact that Martin Luther King was alleged to have a lot of extramarital affairs. And at times, and we know this has already been released, you can Google this, there was a note written to Martin Luther King calling on him to take his own life. And they said, if you don't take your own life, we will reveal all the affairs you are having to your family and the country. King, of course, didn't do that, but he did know that his offices, his phone lines were tapped. The FBI was looking into him. J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, was obsessed with King. He considered him a radical. And one of the concerns from the King family, in addition to sort of reliving the assassination here through all these documents, and we're just a couple hours since the release here, so many of the documents, people will be going through them over the next couple days, but that some of these documents will include FBI files on King's affairs. There were allegations about him fathering a child out of wedlock while he was married. Also, allegation of sexual assault by the people around him that he was present for, of other women, a whole number of allegations and documents that have already come out from the FBI. So a whole variety of things could be coming out here, in addition to potentially more insight into James Earl Ray, the assassination, and the investigation in the days and weeks following.
Now to a political story that could have implications for the midterm elections and beyond, helping Republicans keep control of the House. President Trump has been pressing Texas lawmakers to redraw the state's congressional map to create as many as 5 additional Republican-leaning U.S. House districts, and they could help the GOP maintain congressional control. The Texas legislature kicked off a special session Monday, redistricting high on the agenda. It is a gamble. Texas's maps already tilt towards Republicans. They have 25 of the state's 38 congressional seats. Redrawing them to cut into more Democratic strongholds could lead to even more GOP seats, but they could make some races a bit more competitive for both parties. Republicans only won 58% of voters last year, but they control 2/3 of the House seats, and they are looking to expand that. Texas is the second most populous state. They've got 38 representatives in the House. We've been hearing from a lot of people on Instagram wondering how Texas can do this. So redrawing maps actually falls under state jurisdiction. It's not federal. And as of 2019, the Supreme Court ruled that only state courts, not federal courts, can step in if there is a perceived instance of gerrymandering, which is the practice of drawing maps to favor a political party. We should note Republicans do this, Democrats do this. If you look at any state and the way the congressional districts are, and you didn't know who lived where, you would be like, why do the districts look like that? That they look like a jigsaw puzzle.
Like an insane jigsaw puzzle, a very complicated jigsaw puzzle. Jill, they draw the districts in ways when there's certain Democratic rule in a state or Republican rule in a state, they split up areas where there's a lot of the other party. So Tennessee, Republican state, they slice up Nashville in like, a dozen different ways in order to like basically split up all the Democrats of Nashville into Republican majority districts that include other parts of the state. Same thing in Texas with Austin. Same thing in Maryland, a Democratic state, with parts of the state that are much more Republican. So this is sort of next level what Texas is attempting to do here, doing multiple rounds of redistricting outside of the census. The traditional thing is there's a census every 10 years in America, in the year that ends with 0, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020. And then after that, we determine where people have moved to. So states have a chance to redraw their districts based on that. Now, well, not now, for almost 200 years now, Jill, that hasn't been like sort of a scientific practice. That's been a practice to support parties. You mentioned the term gerrymandering, one of my favorite stories from early American political history, named after Elbridge Gerry. He pronounced his name Gary. We now pronounce it Jerry.
So it should really be gerrymandering.
It should be gerrymandering officially. But we have since named it gerrymandering. So Elbridge Gerry, who signed the Declaration of Independence, he was a vice president, he was the governor of Massachusetts. By the way, he didn't like the practice, but somebody coined it gerrymandering because he was the governor who signed a redistrict into law that helped his party. Again, he was against the map, but his party was like, we got to do this. It helped his party keep certain seats in Massachusetts at the time, and so on and so forth. And here we are 200 years later as all these states do this. Now, every state handles redistricting differently. Some give it to the state legislature. Those are the states where you see very political lines. Some states have said, listen, this is ridiculous. Let's have a nonpartisan commission do it. And so you've seen that in a number of states. So Texas is one of those states where they have a board, but it's composed of the lieutenant governor, the speaker of the House, the attorney general, Republican, a number of others. So they were able to do stuff in a very partisan way. And they already did one a couple years ago, but now they're doing it again. Again, this is something Trump is calling for. He's like, you guys have so many Republican seats there where Republicans are winning by 20 plus points. how about you draw stuff up in a way that will add some more seats? Now that will make things more competitive, but the city of Austin has already sliced up a million different ways into a number of districts. Can you slice them up further to try to win over some Democratic seats and maybe take down those Republican seats and draw them in a way where maybe they're what they call like a +6 or a +7 Republican as opposed to a +18 Republican, meaning it's not an 18-point advantage, but it's a 6-point advantage. Now, Democrats are saying like, oh, okay, maybe that'll make things competitive. But otherwise, Democrats don't have much power here, Jill, at least in the state of Texas. Now, when they tried this about 20 years ago, Democrats literally left the state. 50 legislators, Democrats, fled for Oklahoma to deprive the legislature of having a quorum, meaning there weren't enough people to get the redrawing done. Now, eventually, Republicans, it merely delayed things, and Republicans were able to get it done. Democrats eventually had to return. But this time around, there's a couple other things at stake. Now, there are fines and arrest threats to these Democrats. The other issue they're facing, Jill, terrible optics. If they flee the state, the other thing the legislature's handling right now is addressing flood relief in the state, which would be a very bad look for Democrats to flee and not handle that. Keep in mind, Texas is one of those states where the legislature comes at irregular times and then takes long breaks over a year. So they're back right now. So this is a time for them to do work. But the thing about redistricting, Jill, is other states are looking at this as well on both sides.
Well, that's right. So other states trying the same thing. In Ohio, Republicans are trying to get 2 or 3 more seats on their side through their own map drawing effort. If they're successful, Republicans might control 87% of the seats in a state where President Trump only won 55% of the vote. California, which is the most populous state, is warning that it may also move to redistrict its 52 seats to create more Democratic seats. California Governor Gavin Newsom saying, quote, if we're going to play fair in a world that is wholly unfair, we may have the higher moral ground, but the ground is shifting from underneath us. And I think we have to wake up to that reality. California has an independent redistricting commission that's designed to prevent gerrymandering. However, a ballot measure in a special election could change that.
Yeah, and California has done a good number of, gerrymandering light through the years.
Yes, I like how Gavin Newsom is making it like they're so above board in California.
California, we would never do anything in a partisan way in California that would potentially help Democrats. Anyway, this is sort of the concern here with what Texas is doing, is that this will unleash, gerrymandering on crack, sort of next level of things in every single state. Blue states maxing out, red states maxing out. In New York State, Jill, a few years ago, Democrats went a bit too aggressive after the last census and actually had their map thrown out because of just how much they wanted to slice up the state. And, judges here saying that's too much. We can't have that happening here. So Texas getting aggressive here, adding districts. You're going to see California potentially knock out a bunch of Republican seats in California. Florida is looking at knocking out some Democratic seats. You mentioned Ohio as well. And so this will matter a lot because in the House coming up here, it's a midterm year, which is typically when presidents lose seats. Historically speaking, their party loses seats, and Republicans only have a couple seat majority. So every seat matters here. And so there's a lot of hope around this. President Trump's former press secretary, Sean Spicer, was on the podcast recently, and he predicted that Republicans would retain the House partially due to the fact that they believe that Texas will be able to redistrict here. Take a listen.
So on the House, I think you're going to see some redistricting efforts in Texas. So there's going to be some outside effects to try to squeeze 2 or 3 extra seats. They say up to 5. I hope we don't overreach. President Trump's got a lot of political capital and a lot of political resources. Look at how if you're on the list for Trump, they're hitting everyone up every which way but Sunday. They're raising a boatload of money, which is not what a normal second-term president would ever do.
Keep in mind that back in 2018, Trump's first term, Democrats gained 40 seats to regain a House majority that time around. Now, nobody sees that happening this time around, but all the states are doing the best they can to help out. Well, at least Texas is trying to help out their side, and there could be a domino effect here.
Time for the speed read from the Washington Post. The FAA is now investigating after the pilot of a passenger jet landing in North Dakota had to perform a go-around, as it's called, so that it wouldn't collide with an Air Force B-52. This happened on Friday. SkyWest Flight 3788, acting as a Delta connection between Minneapolis and Minot, North Dakota, was cleared by the tower for landing, and according to SkyWest, the pilot, quote, performed a go-around when another aircraft became visible in their flight path. On a video posted to social media, you could hear the pilot of the commercial plane apologizing to passengers for making what he called an aggressive maneuver to avoid a mid-air collision, adding, "Nobody told us about the other aircraft." Take a listen.
He said, "Turn right." I said, "There's an airplane over there." And he says, "Turn left." And then by the time we read back the clearance, looked over and saw the airplane that was kind of coming on a converging course with us. And so given his speed, it was a military, I don't know how fast they were going, but they were a lot faster than us. I felt it was the safest thing to do to turn behind it. So sorry about the aggressive maneuver. It caught me by surprise. This is not normal at all. I don't know why they didn't give us a heads up, because the Air Force Base does have radar, and nobody said, hey, there's also a B-52 in the pattern. Long story short, it was not fun, but I do apologize for it, and thank you for understanding. It was kind of not a fun day at work. So,
it sounds like the passengers there are pretty happy with the pilot and all of the details that he did provide about what happened.
Yeah, I mean, a scary situation there, but ultimately it appears this pilot, very savvy.
Right, so the Air Force not providing many details about the incident. They did say that a B-52 bomber was performing a flyover at the North Dakota State Fair, which took place in Minot, which is home to a commercial airport and an Air Force base.
Yeah, one of the questions we're going to have here is communications. Typically, military Air Force comms are on different channels than commercial airliners. Of course, the incident that many of us remember, where this was one of the issues, was that Army Black Hawk helicopter that collided with a passenger jet in D.C. back in January, killing all 67 people on board the aircraft and also killing the pilots of the helicopter, where the helicopter wasn't in the place it was supposed to be and crashed into that plane. And so there have been reviews in D.C. when it comes to coordination between military and civilian aircraft, and it sounds like there might have been a similar issue here.
All right, let's head overseas from Reuters. Britain and 27 other Western allies, including Australia, Canada, France, and Italy, said in a joint statement Monday that the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza, quote, must end now, arguing that civilian suffering has reached new depths. The letter was signed by the foreign ministers of almost every Western country, minus the United States and Germany. The statement also denounced Israel's plan to create what they are calling a humanitarian city in the southern part of Gaza, also condemning settler activity in the West Bank. At the same time, the statement is calling for the release of the hostages. There are still about 20 hostages thought to be alive held by Hamas in Gaza. A UN agency says 1 out of every 10 children in Gaza suffer from malnutrition, and it comes at a time of continued reports of mass casualty events in the vicinity of aid distribution sites. Israel rejecting the statement. They say that it sends the wrong message to Hamas. Israel says the war will not end until Hamas lays down its arms and gives up the hostages. It has been nearly 22 months since the attacks on October 7, 2023 that sparked this war. In the statement, the nation's foreign ministers wrote that the suffering of civilians in Gaza has reached new depths. The Israeli government aid delivery model is dangerous, fuels instability, and deprives Gazans of human dignity. At the same time, the negotiations for a hostage truce deal with Hamas continue. At this point, there are reports that Israel has accepted the deal and negotiators are waiting on a response from Hamas. Israel criticizing the timing of this major statement, saying that it could make Hamas less likely to agree to a deal. I guess their argument here being that it would empower Hamas if it could potentially force Israel to stop fighting without getting any concessions in return, making Hamas less likely to accept the ceasefire deal.
Yeah, rinse and repeat here. This is basically the same back and forth that we've been seeing for months. Going back, actually, Jill, to the November 2023 ceasefire, that first ceasefire, and then the Israelis, their basic case. Hamas, disarm, get out, give back hostages, the war is over. Hamas, Israel, get out, we're staying here. And so ultimately we've seen this going on and on and on. And tragically, Jill, these near daily mass casualty events have been reported in the vicinity of these aid distribution sites. One of the questions they're asking is there's Palestinian armed gangs, there's Hamas, there's the Israeli military, and it's not always clear who's doing the shooting, but it is clear who the victims are. Ultimately. Now, in terms of numbers here, that's where things also sometimes get murky. Hamas claiming in this case more than 80 yesterday. Israel says the total is much lower than that. You have two different aid distribution programs right now happening there. You have the UN, and then you have what's called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is backed by the US and Israel. But the UN wants nothing to do with that because the UN wants its own control there. So the Israelis and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation have been complaining about the UN, saying there's no coordination. There were incidents, by the way, in the last 48 hours outside both a UN distribution site as well as a Gaza humanitarian site as well. The Israelis have acknowledged multiple times deaths near their aid sites. They've confirmed that troops have been firing warning shots into the crowds. These huge crowds will come at them. And then in some cases, it appears that soldiers have shot into the crowds here. But they say that the Hamas authorities are exaggerating the number of people who are dying on the Israeli side. Nonetheless, you see the world here extremely frustrated, putting out this statement. I think we're seeing already Trump's frustrated, is looking for an end to this. Again, he has other goals in the region. And so ultimately, whether it's the back and forth that's happening in Syria of late, of course, the Iran situation is calm for now, but very much, Trump, it appears, Caroline Leavitt yesterday spoke about this at the White House, that, he's been on the phone with Netanyahu saying, you guys have to effectively figure out a way to end this, even though Netanyahu will point to Hamas saying they keep refusing the ceasefire proposal, which is something the U.S. acknowledges here. It's just not clear how this gets done and how this ends without someone squeezing the arm of Hamas, what's left of Hamas leadership here, to end this whole thing. The Israelis believe they can do this through force. Folks in the West appear skeptical of that at this point.
Now to some business news from CNN. First, it was eggs. Now it's beef. The last time Americans likely noticed spiking prices at the grocery store was when eggs reached record highs. Since then, egg prices have fallen after the deadly avian flu outbreak was contained. Now beef prices are hitting records, rising almost 9% since January. That's according to the Department of Agriculture. June's consumer price index showed steak prices up about 12% and ground beef prices up about 10% over last year. Lowering beef prices, though, is going to be a lot harder than lowering the price of eggs. The chief agriculture economist at Wells Fargo says, quote, beef is way more complicated than eggs. The cattle industry is still the wild west of the protein market, whereas the egg market is more corporate America with its supply and demand management. So what is behind this increase? Record high beef prices have been a decade in the making because of shrinking herds, drought conditions, and also the rise of imported beef. And this is all happening as demand is still very strong. Last month, Tyson Foods CEO said during their earnings call that beef is experiencing the most challenging market conditions that they've ever seen. Cattle herd sizes are at their lowest levels in 74 years, according to the American Farm Bureau Federation. Cattle ranching not as profitable as it once was. And experts say some ranchers have given up.
Jill, you mentioned the imported beef. Among the countries we import beef from, Brazil, Australia, Canada, Mexico, New Zealand. A number of those countries, we have now put a 10% tariff on. The Mexico and Canada are exempt there, but the rest of them add that to the mix as well. But you mentioned the cattle farmers and the ranchers and the margins decreasing here, shrinking over time, even with these record high prices. One of the big issues they face is the supply costs, feed. Sustained drought conditions through large portions of U.S. ranch land have dried out pastures, forcing ranchers to rely more on expensive feed for cattle instead of free grazing grass. It used to just be free, let the cattle out there. So that's increased costs for them as well.
All right, from USA Today, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, says that his father was taking the sleep medication Ambien before his disastrous debate with Donald Trump that eventually led to Biden ending his 2024 reelection bid amid pressure from top Democrats. Hunter Biden raised the president's use of Ambien, which has not previously been reported, during a more than 3-hour interview on the YouTube show Channel 5 with Andrew Callahan. It aired on July 21st. Here is a bit of what he said.
I know exactly what happened in that debate. He flew around the world, basically, in the mileage that he could have flown around the world 3 times.
Yeah.
He's 81 years old. He's tired as They give him Ambien to be able to sleep. He gets up on the stage, and he looks like he's a deer in the headlights.
Ambien is used to treat insomnia by helping people fall asleep quicker and also stay asleep. Leading to the debate, Biden had returned to Europe for a G7 summit in Italy. He was in France for a few days earlier. honoring Allied veterans on the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And then in between the European trips, he was back in the United States. He was home in Wilmington, Delaware for the verdict of Hunter Biden's gun case trial.
Yeah, though still, Jill, he had a couple of weeks there and he was just chilling. But it sounds like they were giving him Ambien. That's some news here from Hunter. It's leading to questions about how often the president was taking Ambien and what sort of decisions he had to make when he was potentially taking this drug. So this sort of reinforces the argument you're hearing from Biden critics on the right and the House investigators looking into it, being like, what was Joe Biden on and who was making decisions during these various times, waiting to hear details from the Biden folks, whether they're going to comment on what Hunter has to say here. Jill, this was like a nearly 3-hour interview where he was just going off and off.
It was crazy.
Like Hunter just like hates everyone, angry at the
cursing.
world, cursing left and right. Like, yeah, if you tune into the Hunter Biden pod, first of all, if you're interested in hearing Hunter Biden for 3 hours, just be aware that, like, don't play it around the kids because he's just dropping F-bombs like left and right. He goes on this whole rant about George Clooney, who obviously, wrote that op-ed piece last year urging Biden to withdraw. So like he goes on this whole thing about Clooney. Then he goes off about James Carville, the raging Cajun, the strategist who helped Bill Clinton win office. And he's like, this guy hasn't won an effing race in 40 years. Like, why are we listening to him? Then he goes off on David Axelrod, who was the strategist for Obama, being like, he won one effing race in his whole life, and that's because it was Barack Obama, not David Axelrod. Like, he's just going off on all these guys one after another. Then, he's calling, he has choice words for Donald Trump, obviously. He says that if his dad was still president, he would call the president of El Salvador and warn him, you got to send people back or we're going to invade you. So if you see the headline that Hunter Biden wants to invade El Salvador, that's
not helping Hunter.
The general rule, Jill, is that Hunter Biden has never been very helpful to his father.
By the way, he was saying the Ambien thing as if it was a legitimate defense of his dad. The question was like, it was 8 p.m. Was that the Ambien from the night before?
Right,
What's happening?
Also, he was traveling, but like he hadn't flown in like more than a week. So like, why? Like, was it Ambien? Was he taking an Ambien before his nap? Because we know that he was napping often, according to these books, in the middle of the day, towards the end of his presidency, he was like taking a midday nap. I don't know, Jill. We'd have to, I don't know. I don't.
It's the best we could do.
That is your 3-minute summary of Hunter Biden's 3-hour interview.
From People, Malcolm-Jamal Warner, the actor who played Theo Huxtable on The Cosby Show, has died. He was just 54 years old. The actor was in Costa Rica on a family vacation. He drowned while swimming, a rep for Warner not immediately responding to a request for comment. At this point, it appears this death just a very tragic accident. Warner has always kept his personal life very private. As for his legacy, he played the only son of Bill Cosby's character, Heathcliff Huxtable, in the sitcom The Cosby Show from 1984 to 1992. He got an Emmy nomination for the role. He was outspoken about his pride for the sitcom, even after the allegations against Bill Cosby of sexual assault may have tainted the show for some people. The Cosby Show, often credited with breaking new ground in the visibility of African Americans in mainstream media. Warner told People magazine, quote, regardless of how some people may feel about the show now, I am still proud of the legacy and having been a part of such an iconic show that had such a profound impact on, first and foremost, Black culture, but also American culture. Here's a bit of entertainment journalist Segun Odeluo talking about the impact that the character of Theo Huxtable had on his own life.
Culturally, and I think Bomani and myself can speak to this, this is like the loss of a family member in that, look, I'm the child of immigrants and my dad is a PhD, my mom is a therapist. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was the first time I saw somebody that looked like me and my brothers on television that my parents could relate to. The conversations that he would have on screen with his television dad were the same conversations about going to college and cleaning your room that I was having with my father. So his voice as a Black man on screen and then afterwards, just the man he was, the smile, the artist, the Grammy you mentioned, he was also on Def Poetry Jam. There was an aura about him of just class and grace. And for me at my age, it's like losing a family member.
Motion, in that interview, he was also talking about the beauty of the Cosby Show and Theo is that they did also appeal to white America and really broke down barriers. I, for one, was hooked on Thursday night must-see TV, and I'm guessing that you were as well, Moshe, given how much time you spent watching TV, as we know.
I watched a lot of TV, must-see TV Thursday. The Cosby Show, one of the fun things every season was they would redo the opening sequence back when, TV shows had those like opening theme songs.
And they would do a dance,
and they would do a dance. Like they would all do a dance together and they would change it every season, right? With like different costumes and whatnot. The things we looked forward to back in the day, kiddos. And so,
what was it was a fun theme music.
And that's actually, one of the reasons why what came out on Cosby and what Bill Cosby was up to in the trial was like also so disheartening. I mean, he was called America's dad. We all, and watching him, I mean, I still can probably quote back also because back in the day we'd watch reruns from various episodes. There was like an episode where like Theo was like misbehaving and like Bill Cosby's in the room and he's like, I'm going to end you. Like, like if you don't listen to me, I'm misquoting it. But the point is like, it was a very memorable show and really had, all parts of America hooked. And that's why, this headline was really so sad to see yesterday, Jill. He's just 54 years old, dies in this drowning accident in Costa Rica. Now, Malcolm-Jamal Warner would go on to some other sitcoms, some directing as well. Apparently, was also a musical talent, won a Grammy Award in recent years as well.
I also heard some analysts talking about how Theo, back to his role as Theo Huxtable, had a learning disability. He was dyslexic. I don't think I processed it at the time when I was watching because I was so young that I didn't understand. But apparently that was a really big deal too in clearing up some of the misconceptions and normalizing that not everyone learns the same way.
Yeah, it addressed a lot of things, and you got to the earlier thing we were talking about and the bite we just played from CNN. From that reporter is that it also showed the country. It was the first time you saw this like highly successful white collar African-American family on primetime television. And, that was hugely impactful. This lawyer doctor couple, one of these things about TV, especially, during certain decades, is certain shows so impactful in sort of changing America's consciousness around various things, especially when it comes to race, given how complicated the history of this country is with race. So sad to see this news. I think it hit a number of people yesterday. I got a number of notes. All right, we end as always with On This Day in History. On this day in 1937, President Franklin Roosevelt announces his plan to expand the Supreme Court from 9 to 15 justices. He was very frustrated at the time. Presidents over time frustrated with the Supreme Court. Nothing new here. Certainly something we hear from Trump. So FDR said, you guys are so conservative. You're blocking all my New Deal stuff. I'm going to pack the court with more justices. But it turns out Congress was not on board with it, and they would vote it down later that year by 70 to 20. So ultimately FDR's plan to pack the court with 6 more justices and appoint 6 liberals to the court immediately to get some extra stuff done wasn't happening. On this day in 1943, General Patton and the Allied forces take Palermo on the northwest corner of Sicily. This gives the Allies a strategic foothold to invade mainland Italy during World War II. Now, a lot has been made of D-Day, of course, getting that foothold in France, but this was a very important achievement in the war as well. Since we've been talking about late night, on this day in 1996, 29 years ago today, The Daily Show premiered with host Craig Kilborn. Some of you might remember it. Back then, he hosted for a couple years. Then Jon Stewart hosted for 16 years. Then Jon Stewart left and Trevor Noah took over. And then he left and Jon Stewart is back. On this day in 2013, Prince George, the first child of Prince William and Kate Middleton, is born. That means, Jill, that Prince George is 12 years old today. His voice is cracking, I imagine. I haven't heard him speak recently. Yeah. We're getting there.
If he's 12, that means I am
22.
Right, never mind. Yeah, exactly.
And we end here, actually staying in the UK. On this day in 2019, Queen's iconic Bohemian Rhapsody reached 1 billion views on YouTube. It became the first pre-1990s visual or video to reach 1 billion views on YouTube. We are now just shy, Jill, of 2 billion, though that's like the official video. A lot of people have have versions of it on YouTube. So it's way over 2 billion at this point. A little history behind the song: 6 minutes in length, as some of you who are familiar with the song would know. Got a great revival with Wayne's World back in the early 90s. And interestingly, Freddie Mercury of Queen told his bandmates that he had enough material for 3 new songs, but he was thinking about blending all 3 songs into one long extravaganza. And so that's why we have Bohemian Rhapsody, because Freddie Mercury was like, I'm gonna put 3 songs in one. Which as you listen to that song, you totally hear. You're like, okay, that feels like a different song at this point in the song.
It literally just goes from like opera to rock. It does not really seem to go together, but somehow it works.
You cry, you laugh.
It takes you through everything.
By the end of the song, Prince George is 12 years old.
Pretty much. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Thanks, everyone. Scaramouche, Scaramouche. Go do the fandango.
Thunderbolt of lightning. Very, very frightening.
Galileo. 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 Galileo.
You can't stop.
Can't stop. We're going to stop, though, for all of you. Have a good day.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.